The Supreme Court has been delivering one controversial decision after another, truly letting their relatively new, heavily conservative leaning show. And so I want to go through today and update you on all of the recent notable decisions that have come down in the last just number of weeks, really the last week or two. So that's what we'll be doing for today's story, is walking through big cases that really reveal the recent ideological shift of the Supreme Court to the right, of course. And again, all of this has just happened in the last few days. You know, most of what we're going to go through is just the last few days, which is pretty wild. So first, a big expansion to personal gun ownership rights. Reading from the AP, in a major expansion of gun rights after a series of mass shootings, the Supreme Court said Thursday that Americans have a right to carry firearms in public for self-defense, a ruling likely to lead to more people legally armed. The decision came out as Congress and states debate gun control legislation. About 1/4 of the U.S. population lives in states expected to be affected by the ruling, which struck down a New York gun law. The High Court's first major gun decision in more than a decade split the court 6-3, with the court's conservatives in the majority and liberals in dissent. Across the street from the court, lawmakers at the Capitol sped toward passage of gun legislation prompted by recent massacres in Texas, New York, and California. Senators cleared the way for the measure, modest in the scope, but still the most far-reaching in decades. So big expansion of gun rights coming down. That's something, as I mentioned, that hasn't happened in over a decade, I think it noted. And so again, massive representation of that effect that those new Trump-appointed justices, relatively new Trump-appointed justices, are having on the court. Next, they ruled two cases that exemplified the straying away from a strict separation of governmental bodies and religion. So first, reading from CNN, Supreme Court justices on Monday readily put themselves in the shoes of a football coach who wanted to pray at midfield after a game, over those of students who might feel pressure to join him. In an expansive decision focused on the suppression of religious voices, the 6-3 ruling against a Washington state school district that suspended coach Joseph Kennedy reinforces a modern court pattern favoring religious conservatives and a greater maligning of church and state. So this is big, and it's the first of two recent decisions related to that separation of church and state. So before we get into my thoughts on this, let's just go ahead and look over that second case. The U.S. Supreme Court further reduced the separation of church and state in a ruling on Tuesday, reading from Reuters, endorsing more public funding of religious entities as its conservative justices sided with two Christian families who challenged a main tuition assistance program that excluded private religious schools. So why is this significant? Well, one of the things that was laid out in the Constitution is that the government, Congress, cannot establish a national religion. Well, what does that mean in practice? Well, if the government gives preferential treatment, if it gives some sort of endorsement to one particular religion, that is inherently getting in the way of allowing all religions to be treated equal and all people to be able to practice their religion or their lack of religion in whatever way they choose. And so in both of these rulings, you're seeing a little bit of that intermingling where now government paid employees, the coach, and funding is going towards religious schools. And so I want to say, we're going to get into this more later on in the show. There's a Lauren Boebert discussion that she got into about how she's so sick of the discussion around separation of church and state because she thinks it should be all intermingled. But it's so important that we make it clear to people what the significance is of that part of our Constitution and why that's something we have to hold on to and defend. And so it's not that these particular decisions are having this massive effect where now we don't have separation of church and state, this, that, and the other. It's not that. It's that it represents a lessening in how strict the Supreme Court is about drawing that line, that we don't want to cross over any of our state related stuff with a particular religious practice, because then you're stepping on that part of the Constitution. You're stepping on that idea that you keep the two separate so that every individual can practice their religion or their lack thereof in whatever way they choose. So that's kind of the outline. But again, we're going to discuss this a lot more in this upcoming Lauren Boebert story. But to remind you, the part of the Constitution that I'm referencing, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that's what people recognize as the separation of church and state idea. And it's odd because sometimes conservatives will point to the phrase separation of church and state and say, that's nowhere in the Constitution. Yes, we understand that. That's not the point. The point is that, as you can see in this part of the Constitution, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Congress / the government should not get involved in the establishment of a religion, because that would be recognizing one religion as more credible, more legitimate than other religions, which gets in the way of free expression of religion. So it's so crucial that we don't allow conservatives to be the only ones pushing on this issue. It is crucial that we respect the separation of church and state, which is what this part of the Constitution lays out. And that's what the concern is with those two recent Supreme Court rulings, is that they're not respecting that to the extent that they should. And then, of course, the ruling over Roe v. Wade. Y'all all know that all too well, but Roe v. Wade, decided many, many years ago, has been precedent. It established a right to the decision about an abortion up to a certain point in the pregnancy. Federally, that has been overturned, so now it is left up to the states, and it just marks another huge conservative slide in that direction of the Supreme Court. And then the most recent ruling, reading from CBS, the Supreme Court on Thursday limited the power of the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from power plants, delivering a significant blow to the Biden administration's efforts to fight climate change. The court divided 6-3 along ideological lines in finding that Congress, through the Clean Air Act, did not grant the EPA the authority to adopt on its own a regulatory scheme to cap carbon dioxide emissions from power plants to combat global warming. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the majority opinion, while the court's 3-member liberal bloc dissented. So this is unfortunate because it gets in the way of the Biden administration and their efforts to act on climate change, which is concerning. Obviously, it's a massive issue we need to address, and already we're not doing enough. So the fact that the Supreme Court is getting involved and preventing the ability of the Biden administration to take those steps is negative, to say the least, and it's concerning in its representation of that rightward shift. Now, to close, we don't want to be all bummed out, so I would say the main positive thing out of the Supreme Court lately is this one. Ketanji Brown Jackson, officially a part of the Supreme Court, and she's going to be an absolute wonderful justice, has great values, great experience, and is very, very qualified. And then, as you know, she'll also be the first Black woman to serve on the court, which is amazing as far as representation goes. But again, she's so qualified and really, I think, upholds the values that you would want in a Supreme Court justice. It won't, however, shift the ideological leanings of the Supreme Court significantly, because she is a liberal justice, and so is Breyer, who she's replacing. But regardless, we have to take our wins when we can get them.